Before the story carries you away, subscribe now. By the time these words fade, you'll already be drifting into peaceful sleep. Olmec civilization, the giant stone heads that changed American history. In the year 1862, a Mexican traveler named Jose Maria Melgar y Serrano was navigating the steamy, verdant landscape of Veracruz, a region hugging the curvature of the Gulf of Mexico. He was hearing rumors of something strange buried in the earth, something that the local plantation workers had encountered while clearing the dense jungle for sugarcane. Melgar was a man of curiosity, an antiquarian at heart, and when he finally stood before the object of these rumors, he found himself staring into a pair of stone eyes that had not seen the light of the sun for nearly 3,000 years. It was a head, a colossal, brooding head carved from a single boulder of volcanic basalt, measuring several feet in height and weighing many tons. The face was distinct, possessing thick lips, a broad nose, and a fitting helmet that suggested a warrior or a ball player. Melgar was baffled. The features did not look like the indigenous people he knew, nor did they resemble the Europeans. In his confusion, bounded by the limited anthropological knowledge of the 19th century, he speculated that perhaps an ancient migration from Ethiopia had crossed the Atlantic. He was wrong, of course, but his discovery sparked a fire that would eventually illuminate the true mother culture of Mesoamerica. This was the first encounter the modern world had with the Olmecs. To understand the Olmec civilization is to peel back the layers of history in the Americas to their very bedrock. Before the Aztecs built their floating gardens in Tenochtitlan, before the Maya erected their soaring temple pyramids in Tikal and Palenque, the Olmecs were taming the swamps of the Gulf Coast. They are frequently cited by archaeologists as the cultura madre, the mother culture, the civilization that established the blueprint for everything that would follow in Mexico and Central America. From their calendar systems to their ball games, from their pantheon of gods to their social hierarchy, the Olmecs innovated the fundamental aspects of Mesoamerican life. And yet, for the longest time, they were a ghost civilization, known only by the enigmatic artifacts they left behind in the rubber-rich lowlands of what are now the Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco. The environment where the Olmec culture flourished is not the kind of place one typically associates with the cradle of a high civilization. Unlike the arid river valleys of the Nile or the Tigris and Euphrates, where irrigation was the key to life, the Olmec heartland was a world of water surplus. It is a region dominated by meandering rivers, particularly the Coatzacoalcos, which wind through floodplains that turn into vast swamps during the rainy season. The heat is oppressive, the humidity relentless. It is a green hell of mangroves, snakes, jaguars, and crocodiles. However, much like the Nile, these rivers flooded annually, depositing rich, fertile silt across the levee lands. This richness allowed for a biological explosion. The Olmecs, or the ancestors of the Olmecs, learned that by settling on the natural levees, the ridges of land created by river deposits, they could harvest 2, sometimes 3 crops of maize a year. This agricultural surplus is the engine of civilization. Once a society produces more food than it needs to survive, it frees up a portion of the population to do other things. They can become priests, artisans, traders, or engineers. They can begin to move massive stones. The timeline of the Olmecs is generally divided by archaeologists into distinct phases, but the civilization truly coalesced around 1400 BCE. This places them contemporaneously with the New Kingdom of Egypt and the Shang dynasty of China. While Tutankhamun was being laid to rest in the Valley of the Kings, The Olmecs were dragging basalt boulders weighing up to 40 tons through swamps and rivers to create portraits of their kings. The first great capital of this civilization was a site now known as San Lorenzo. Today, San Lorenzo looks like a series of gentle hills covered in pasture, but archaeological investigations have revealed it to be one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world. The entire plateau upon which the site rests was artificially modified. The Olmecs moved millions of cubic meters of earth, shaping the landscape to their will, creating a dry, defensible, and imposing platform above the floodwaters. At San Lorenzo, we see the emergence of a highly stratified society. It was not a village of equals. There were elites, likely a hereditary dynasty of rulers, who commanded the labor of thousands. It is here that the most famous of the Olmec artifacts, the colossal heads, appear in their greatest numbers. To date, 17 of these heads have been found across the Olmec heartland, with 10 of them coming from San Lorenzo. These heads are the centerpiece of the Olmec mystery and their majesty. They are not generic representations of gods, they are portraits. Each face is unique. Some are smiling slightly, others frown, some look youthful, others aging. They wear different helmets, likely made of leather or cloth in reality, bearing distinct insignias, jaguar paws, bird talons, or abstract geometric symbols. These helmets are thought to represent the headgear worn during the ritual ballgame, or perhaps the protective gear of war. The prevailing theory among scholars is that these heads represent specific rulers, the kings of San Lorenzo. The creation of a colossal head was a statement of absolute power. The stone used for these monuments is basalt, a hard volcanic rock. The nearest source of this basalt is the Tuxtla Mountains, located about 50 to 60 miles away from San Lorenzo. The terrain between the mountains and the city is a nightmare of swamps, ravines, and winding rivers. The Olmecs had no wheels, no beasts of burden like horses or oxen, and no metal tools. They worked the stone with stone. They likely quarried the boulders in the mountains using heat to crack the rock and stone hammers to shape it. Then came the transport. Experimental archaeology and engineering analysis suggest that they moved these 20 to 40-ton stones using a combination of wooden rollers, sledges, and massive rafts. To move a 40-ton boulder over land requires hundreds of men hauling on ropes, coordinated by chanters or drummers. To float it down a river requires a raft of immense buoyancy and stability, and intimate knowledge of the currents. The logistical capacity to organize the food, water, and shelter for such a workforce, and the political power to demand that labor, speaks of a highly complex state apparatus. When a ruler commissioned a head, he was not just making a statue. He was demonstrating that he could move the earth itself. But San Lorenzo was more than just a gallery of stone heads. It was a functioning city with complex hydraulic engineering. Archaeologists have discovered an elaborate system of drain lines made from U-shaped basalt stones buried underground. These drains were fitted with covers to keep debris out, and were designed to manage the flow of water across the plateau, perhaps for ritual purposes, or to prevent erosion during the torrential downpours of the wet season. The existence of such infrastructure implies urban planning and a concern for the longevity of the site. At the top of the social pyramid lived the ruler in what is known as the Red Palace, a structure with red pigmented earthen floors and basalt columns. Here the elites feasted on dog meat, snapping turtle, and venison, while the commoners living on the terrace slopes below subsisted mainly on maize, beans, and fish. Around 900 BCE, something dramatic happened at San Lorenzo. The site was largely abandoned, and many of the monuments were defaced. For years, archaeologists believed this was the result of a violent revolution, an uprising of the peasantry against the labor-demanding elites. The heads were found buried in lines, with pockmarks and grooves ground into them, and some were even decapitated or toppled. However, newer theories propose a more nuanced interpretation. In Mesoamerican belief systems, which the Olmecs helped formulate, objects were considered to be animate. A stone head was not just a rock. It contained the soul or the essence of the ruler it depicted. When that ruler died, or when a dynasty passed, it might have been necessary to ritually kill the monument, to neutralize its power, or to release the spirit within. The burial of the heads might not have been an act of disrespect, but a form of reverent closure, moving the ancestor into the underworld. Alternatively, the defacement could indeed represent a violent rejection of the old order. Whatever the cause, the center of gravity of the Olmec world shifted northeast to a new capital, La Venta. La Venta, rising to prominence as San Lorenzo fell, represents the apogee of Olmec complexity and artistic achievement. Located on an island in the middle of a coastal swamp near the Tonala River, La Venta was designed with a specific geometric orientation. Its buildings are aligned 8 degrees west of north, a distinctive skew that likely relates to astronomical observations, perhaps the setting of a specific constellation or the movement of the planet Venus. This alignment is one of the first examples of the sacred geometry that would define later Maya and Aztec cities. Dominating the site is the Great Pyramid, a conical structure made of clay that stands over 30 meters high. Unlike the stone pyramids of the Maya or the Egyptians, the La Venta pyramid is an earthen mound. Some scholars believe its fluted shape was intended to mimic a volcano, bringing the power of the sacred mountains into the flat lowlands. Mountains, in Mesoamerican cosmology, were the homes of the ancestors and the source of water and life. By building an artificial mountain, the Olmecs were creating an axis mundi, a center of the world connecting the sky, the earth, and the underworld. The subterranean secrets of La Venta are even more astounding than its surface architecture. The Olmecs practiced a form of, quote, hidden artwork. They created massive, intricate offerings that were never meant to be seen by the living. One of the most spectacular examples is the mosaic pavements. These are abstract designs, stylized images of the Olmec dragon or jaguar, created using hundreds of blocks of green serpentine rock. These mosaics were laid out with precision, covered with layers of colored clay, and then immediately buried. This behavior seems counterintuitive to the modern mind. Why spend thousands of hours creating a masterpiece only to hide it? The answer lies in the act of offering. The value of the artwork was in the effort and the material sacrificed to the earth. It was a gift to the gods, an energy deposited into the ground to ensure the stability of the cosmos. The earth was charged with this sacred power. La Venta also provides us with the clearest window into Olmec religion and the concept of shamanism. The Olmecs are often called the people of the jaguar because of their obsession with jaguar imagery. But it is not just the animal itself, it is the transformation. Olmec art is filled with images of jaguars, figures that are half human and half feline. These figures often have the cleft head of a jaguar, the downturned snarling mouth, and almond-shaped eyes. We see this on jade figurines, on ceramic vessels, and on the colossal heads themselves. This imagery is deeply connected to the practice of shamanism. In the shamanic worldview, the spiritual leader has the ability to leave his human body and assume the form of a powerful animal spirit, or nagual. to travel between the realms. The jaguar, being the apex predator of the jungle, a creature that hunts by night and swims in the water, is the ultimate symbol of this supernatural power. Some of the most disturbing and debated artifacts are the jaguar babies, statues of infants with snarling jaguar features. Some interpretations suggest these represent a mythological union between a woman and a jaguar, the progenitor of the Olmec lineage. Others suggest they represent the infantilized soul of the shaman, or the sacrifice of children, though evidence for the latter is less direct than in later cultures. The material of choice for the Olmecs was jade, specifically jadeite. This stone is harder than steel and incredibly difficult to carve without metal tools. The Olmecs sourced their jade from the Motagua River Valley in far-off Guatemala, hundreds of miles away. This indicates a vast and sophisticated trade network. They did not value gold, they valued green stone. Green was the color of maize, of water, of life, and of the soul. A piece of polished jade was a piece of eternal life. The Olmec artisans were masters of working this stubborn material, using abrasive sands and string saws to cut and polish it into exquisite figurines, masks, and celts, ritual axe heads. At La Venta, archaeologists found offerings containing hundreds of these jade celts, arranged in cruciform patterns. The sheer accumulation of wealth buried in the ground at La Venta is staggering. It demonstrates that the Olmec lords had the power to withdraw vast amounts of precious resources from circulation and consign them to the gods, a potlatch of immense proportions. Beyond the stone and the jade, the Olmecs were pioneers of the intellectual culture of Mesoamerica. For a long time, it was believed that the Maya were the inventors of the long count calendar and the writing system of the region. However, evidence suggests the Olmecs, or the EPI Olmec culture that followed them, laid the groundwork. The Cascajal block, discovered in a quarry near San Lorenzo in the late 1990s, contains 62 glyphs that appear to be a form of writing. While it remains undeciphered and its dating is debated, it suggests that the Olmecs were recording their thoughts and rituals long before the first Maya stelae were carved. Furthermore, the concept of the long count, the linear count of days from a mythological start date, which allows for precise historical record-keeping, appears on monuments in the Olmec heartland at sites like Tres Zapotes during the late period. This obsession with time, with the cycles of the stars and the planets, was not just academic. It was a way of controlling the narrative of power. If a king could predict the rainy season or an eclipse, he could claim to influence the gods. One cannot discuss the Olmecs without mentioning the ball game. The Mesoamerican ball game is one of the most iconic features of the region's ancient cultures, played by the Maya, the Zapotecs, and the Aztecs. But the rubber ball itself originates here, in the land of the rubber trees. In fact, the name Olmec is a Nahuatl, Aztec word meaning people of the rubber country. The Olmecs did not call themselves Olmecs. We do not know their name for themselves. At the site of El Manati, a waterlogged bog that preserved organic materials, archaeologists found the oldest rubber balls ever discovered, dating back to 1600 BCE. These balls are solid rubber, heavy and dangerous. The game was likely played as a ritual reenactment of the movement of the sun and moon, or a battle between the forces of the underworld and the sky. It was a solemn affair, often associated with human sacrifice in later periods, though the rules and consequences in Olmec times are still a matter of speculation. The discovery of these balls confirms that this central pillar of Mesoamerican culture began in the swamps of Veracruz. The reach of the Olmecs extended far beyond their heartland. we find Olmec-style iconography, the cleft heads, the baby faces, the flame eyebrows, on pottery and rock carvings all over Mexico, from the highlands of central Mexico to the Pacific coast of Chiapas and down into El Salvador. This phenomenon has led to the mother culture versus sister culture debate. The mother culture proponents argue that the Olmecs were the sole innovators who exported their civilization to less advanced neighbors through conquest, trade, or missionary activity. The sister culture proponents argue that the Olmecs were just the most prominent of several interacting chiefdoms that evolved simultaneously, sharing ideas and technologies in a lattice of exchange. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. The Olmecs were undoubtedly the most complex and populous society of their time, and their brand of religion and kingship was highly attractive to aspiring elites in other regions. By adopting Olmec symbols, a chieftain in the Valley of Mexico could associate himself with the prestige and power of the great coastal lords. Daily life for the average Olmec was a rhythm dictated by the river and the sun. They lived in pole and thatch houses built on earthen mounds to stay above the mud. They were farmers, but also fishermen and hunters. The diet was rich and varied. Recent chemical analyses of pottery residues show they were drinking chocolate, cacao. This is one of the earliest known uses of cacao. For the Olmecs, chocolate was a ceremonial drink, likely restricted to the elite, a frothy, bitter beverage, often mixed with spices or corn gruel. They also consumed vast quantities of maize, processed through nixtamalization, soaking the corn in lime water to release its nutrients. This chemical process is one of the great unsung inventions of the Americas, preventing malnutrition and allowing for the sustenance of large populations. The spiritual life of the commoner was likely filled with household rituals. Terracotta figurines found in trash middens suggest a domestic cult of fertility and healing. But the grand religion, the theater of the state, took place in the ceremonial centers. Imagine the scene at La Venta during a major festival. The air is thick with the smoke of copal incense. The sound of conch shell trumpets and wooden drums vibrates in your chest. The plaza is packed with people. At the top of the earthen pyramid, the ruler appears, decked in quetzal feathers and jade, wearing the headdress of the shark monster, or the maize god. He performs a bloodletting ritual, piercing his tongue or genitals with a stingray spine to offer his precious blood to the earth, ensuring that the sun will rise and the rains will come. This was the social contract. The commoners provided the food and labor, and the ruler provided the spiritual security that kept the universe from collapsing. As we move into the later centuries of the first millennium BCE, the Olmec world began to fracture. La Venta, like San Lorenzo before it, went into decline around 400 BCE. The great offerings were ceased, the building projects stopped, and the population dispersed. The causes of this collapse are multifaceted. Environmental changes likely played a significant role. The river systems in this region are dynamic. A shift in the course of the Coatzacoalcos or Tonala rivers could leave a major city without its highway and its water source. Tectonic activity or volcanic eruptions in the Tuxtlas could have disrupted the ecology. Furthermore, the intense agriculture required to support these cities may have led to soil depletion and siltation of the waterways. There is also evidence of political stress. The sheer cost of maintaining the elite class, the conspicuous consumption of burying tons of jade and mirrors, may have become unsustainable. As the trade networks fluctuated, the authority of the rulers, predicated on their access to exotic goods, would have waned. Violence, both internal and external, likely accelerated the process. However, The Olmecs did not simply vanish. They evolved. In the centuries following the fall of Levanta, a culture known as the Epi Olmec or Isthmian culture emerged at sites like Tres Zapotes. Here, the artistic style changed. The colossal heads ceased to be carved. The art became more narrative, more focused on historical scenes and texts. It is in this Epi Olmec phase that we see the clearest bridge to the Maya. The tuxless statuette, a small greenstone figure of a man wearing a duckbill mask, bears a long column of glyphs with a date corresponding to 162 CE. It shows the transition of the writing system from the early blocks to the fluent script of the Classic period. The legacy of the Olmecs is omnipresent in the Americas, even if their name was forgotten for millennia. Every time a Maya king ascended the throne, he was participating in a lineage of power defined by the Olmecs. Every time an Aztec priest sacrificed a victim to Tlaloc, the rain god, he was worshipping a deity whose iconography, the goggle eyes and fangs, can be traced back to Olmec rain spirits. The concept of the cardinal directions, the color coding of the world, the sanctity of the cave and the mountain, the importance of the green stone, these are Olmec ideas. Even the layout of Teotihuacan, the great metropolis of the Mexican highlands, echoes the geometric orientation pioneered at La Venta. Let us return to the colossal heads, the most enduring sentinels of this lost world. Consider the sheer human drama encapsulated in The King, the popular name for Head 1 found at San Lorenzo. He has a commanding presence, a stern gaze that seems to look right through you. To create this, an artist had to look at a living man and capture his soul in stone. Then, a workforce of thousands had to believe in that man enough to drag a mountain across a swamp. It speaks of a charisma and a consolidation of power that is terrifyingly impressive. These heads were likely painted in bright colors originally, reds, ochres, blacks, making them even more imposing. They stood in lines in the plaza, a row of ancestors watching over their descendants, a dynastic history written in basalt. Recent technological advances like LiDAR, light detection and ranging, are revealing that the Olmec density was far greater than previously thought. The jungle canopy hides not just a few cities, but an entire landscape of modified terrain. We are finding more causeways, more settlements, and more earthworks that connect the major centers. The Olmecs were not just isolated pockets of civilization. They were a regional state with a reach that integrated the coast into a bustling hive of activity. We are also learning more about their interaction with the water. They were likely master canoers, using the river networks as a circulatory system for trade and war. The discovery of El Manati, a sacred shrine centered on a natural spring, shows that they viewed water as a portal. The wooden busts found there, preserved in the anaerobic mud, give us a rare look at Olmec wood carving. These faces are different from the stone heads. They are more individual, more delicate, some even showing signs of old age or deformity. They remind us that the stone monuments are the propaganda of the state, while the wooden offerings might be the more personal prayers of the people. One of the most fascinating aspects of Olmec art is the baby face motif. These hollow ceramic figures depict chubby, sexless infants with the characteristic jaguar mouth. They are found not just in temples, but in houses. They rattle when shaken. Were they toys? Unlikely. They were ritual objects. The focus on the infant in Olmec art is unique. In many ancient cultures, art focuses on the virile warrior or the wise elder. The Olmec focus on the baby, often a supernatural baby, suggests a theology centered on potential, on growth, and perhaps on the dangerous, chaotic power of the newborn who has just arrived from the spirit world. It connects to the maze cycle, the seed that must be buried, like an infant, to be reborn as the sustainer of life. The trade networks of the Olmecs deserve a deeper look to understand their economic engine. We know they imported jade from the south and obsidian, volcanic glass, from the highlands. But what did they export? They likely exported perishable goods that have left no trace in the archaeological record. Rubber, cacao, colorful bird feathers, jaguar pelts, and perhaps salt from the coastal flats. But their most valuable export was their ideology. They exported the idea of civilization. A chieftain in Oaxaca might import an Olmec-style ceramic vessel not just because it was beautiful, but because possessing it showed he was connected to the sophisticated lords of the Gulf. It was a form of prestige technology. By emulating the Olmecs, other emerging elites legitimized their own rule. This is why the Olmec style spread so far and wide. It was the symbol of high culture. The acoustic engineering of the Olmecs is another frontier of research. At San Lorenzo and La Venta, the arrangement of the mounds and the plazas may have been designed to amplify sound. The roar of the jaguar, the blast of the conch trumpet, or the voice of the king needed to be heard by the masses. The basalt columns found at La Venta, which enclosed the sacred precinct, might have had acoustic properties or served to separate the sacred silence of the inner sanctum from the noise of the profane world outside. The sensory experience of an Olmec city, the visual impact of the red-painted floors, the smell of the swamps and incense, the sound of rituals, was a carefully curated theater of power. As we examine the later stages of Olmec history, the distinction between Olmec and Maya begins to blur in the borderlands. In the Chiapas region and the Pacific slopes, sites like Izapa show a fusion of styles. This suggests that the collapse of the Olmec heartland did not mean the death of the culture, but rather its diaspora. The refugees or the descendants of the Olmec elites may have migrated, taking their knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and kingship to the emerging Maya centers in the Petén rainforests. The DNA of the Olmec civilization is woven into the double helix of every subsequent Mesoamerican society. The mystery of the Olmec blue jade is a testament to their geological expertise. For years, geologists could not find the source of the translucent blue-green jade favored by the Olmecs. It was only recently rediscovered in the Motagua Fault Zone, deep in huge formations that had been lost to history. The Olmecs were not just picking up pretty stones. They were prospectors. They understood the earth. They knew where to find the magnetite to make their compasses. Yes, the Olmecs produced small, polished bars of magnetite that functioned as compasses, likely used for geomancy and orienting their buildings rather than navigation. This implies a knowledge of magnetism more than 1,000 years before the Chinese south-pointing chariot. The enigmatic Altar 4 at La Venta offers a perfect summary of Olmec cosmology. It is a massive block of stone, carved to look like the mouth of a cave or a monster. A ruler sits in the niche, holding a rope that winds around the base of the altar and binds captives carved on the sides. The ruler is emerging from the underworld, sitting at the threshold between the supernatural and the natural. He is the mediator. The rope represents his ability to bind the chaotic forces of the world, and perhaps his lineage connection to the ancestors. This altar was not just a throne, it was a stage prop for the performance of kingship. When the ruler sat there, he was literally sitting in the mouth of the earth monster. In the end, the Olmecs remain partially obscured by the mists of the tropical lowlands. Their wooden cities have rotted away. Their books, if they had them on bark paper, have disintegrated, and their spoken language is lost. reconstructed only partially through the glottochronology of the Mixozoian languages. We are left with the hard, imperishable parts of their world, the basalt, the jade, and the earthworks. But these remains tell a story of incredible human ingenuity. They tell of a people who looked at a swamp and saw a kingdom. They tell of a people who looked at a rock and saw a god. The discovery of the Olmecs forced the world to rewrite the history books. It destroyed the notion that the Americas were a cultural backwater until the arrival of the Europeans or even until the rise of the Maya. It proved that deep in antiquity, in the jungles of Mexico, the human mind had devised a complex, vibrant, and sophisticated civilization that rivaled those of the Old World. The giant stone heads are not just sculptures, they are witnesses. They have watched the rise and fall of empires, the clearing of the jungles, and the encroaching of the modern world. They stand as silent sentinels of the genius of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. As archaeologists continue to dig, probing the depths of the Tonala River or scanning the dense forests of Veracruz with lasers, we can be certain that the Olmecs have more secrets to reveal. We have likely only scratched the surface of the great platform at San Lorenzo, or the buried offerings of La Venta. There may be royal tombs waiting to be found, perhaps answering the question of where the kings who commissioned the heads were laid to rest. The story of the Olmecs is still being written, or rather, deciphered from the clues they left behind in the mud and stone. It is a detective story on a civilizational scale. We must also consider the role of the Olmecs in the broader context of world history. They developed independently. They did not have contact with the Egyptians, the Sumerians, or the Chinese. They invented agriculture, writing, urbanization, and statecraft entirely on their own. This makes them a crucial case study for understanding human nature. It suggests that the drive to build, to organize, to create art, and to look at the stars is not the property of one race or one region, but a universal impulse of the human species. The Olmecs show us what humanity is capable of achieving, even in the most challenging of environments. The transition from the pre-classic to the classic period in Mesoamerica is effectively the story of the Olmec legacy taking root. The Maya did not spring from nowhere. They stood on the shoulders of the Olmec giants. When we marvel at the astronomical precision of Chichen Itza or the intricate glyphs of Palenque, we are seeing the flowering of seeds planted 1,000 years earlier in the Olmec heartland. The ball courts of the classic period echo the rubber balls of El Manati. The divine kings of Tikal echo the stern portraits of San Lorenzo. Even the modern name of the region, Mexico, is linked to this lineage, though indirectly through the Aztecs who inherited this world. The cultural continuity of Mesoamerica is one of the most remarkable phenomena in history, an unbroken chain of tradition that survived the rise and fall of multiple civilizations, only to be severely tested by the Spanish conquest. Yet, even today, in the indigenous communities of Veracruz and Tabasco, the descendants of the Olmecs still farm the maize, still weave the textiles, and still tell stories of the Shenecs, the dwarf spirits of the forest that bear a suspicious resemblance to the Olmec jade figurines. The study of the Olmecs is also a lesson in humility for the historian. For centuries, they were invisible, their achievements attributed to others or ignored. It took the accidental discovery of a stone head by a traveler to start the process of recognition. It reminds us that history is not a fixed narrative, but a shifting landscape, constantly reshaped by new discoveries. What other civilizations lie buried beneath the sands or the jungles, waiting for their stone heads to be found? The Olmecs teach us to keep looking, to keep questioning, and to respect the deep time of human achievement. As we stand in the museum in Salapa, surrounded by these giants, we feel a connection across the abyss of time. The eyes of the heads are devoid of pupils, yet they seem to see. They project a calm, unshakable confidence. They are the faces of men who believed they were the center of the universe, and for a time, they were. The Olmec civilization may have faded, its cities reclaimed by the green embrace of the jungle, but its heartbeat pulses through the veins of every culture that followed. They were the first to civilize the wilderness, the first to give form to the gods of rain and maize, and the first to carve their identity into the eternal rock. They were the Olmecs, and they changed American history forever. The complexity of their water management systems at San Lorenzo cannot be overstated. We are talking about lagunas, man-made ponds, and sluice gates that required a grasp of fluid dynamics. They were manipulating their environment to create a paradise in a swamp. This required not just engineering, but a social contract. The people had to believe that the modification of the land was for the greater good, or at least for the good of the gods. The labor tax, the tribute of sweat, was the currency of the realm, and in return, the rulers provided order. They mediated with the unpredictable forces of nature. Let's look closer at the twins of El Azuzul. Found near San Lorenzo, these are two identical stone sculptures of young men, kneeling before two jaguar sculptures. The scene is like a frozen moment of a myth. Are they the hero twins from the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation myth written down thousands of years later? In the myth, the hero twins play the ball game against the lords of the underworld to resurrect their father, the maize god. The presence of these statues suggests that the core of this myth was already present in Olmec times. It implies a continuity of storytelling that spans millennia. It means the stories told by the Maya firesides were stories their Olmec ancestors had told while carving the great heads. The geological analysis of the obsidian found in Olmec sites is a map of their geopolitical influence. We find obsidian from the Pachuca source in central Mexico, which is green and gold. We find obsidian from Guatemala. Each piece of volcanic glass traveled hundreds of miles, passing from hand to hand, likely increasing in value with every mile. Obsidian was the steel of the ancient Americas. It was used for knives, scrapers, and weapons. Control over the obsidian trade would have been a major source of power. The Olmecs, situated in the lowlands where there is no stone, were desperate for these imports. Their entire civilization relied on the ability to bring stone in, whether it was the basalt for their heads or the obsidian for their blades. This necessity drove their trade network. One curious absence in the Olmec archaeological record is the lack of large-scale military fortifications in the early period. San Lorenzo is on a hill, yes, but it doesn't have the massive walls and moats we see in later Maya cities like Bican. This has led some to speculate that the Olmec dominance was originally based on religious and cultural prestige rather than brute military force. They were the Vatican of the pre-classic, not the Rome. However, as time went on, violence clearly increased. The mutilation of the monument suggests internal strife, and the later sites are more defensible. The Pax Olmeca, if it existed, was fragile. The chemical composition of the bitumen found on Olmec pottery is another fascinating detail. Bitumen is a natural tar. The Olmecs used it to seal their canoes and to decorate their pottery. It was also used as a glue. The sources of this bitumen are coastal seeps. This underlines their connection to the petroleum-rich geology of the Gulf Coast, the same region that is the center of Mexico's oil industry today. The rubber people were also the bitumen people. They were masters of the organic chemistry of their region, utilizing every resource the swamp provided. Consider the wrestler, a basalt statue found in Veracruz. It depicts a man with a mustache and beard, rare in indigenous art, sitting with his arms crossed and legs bent, as if in dynamic motion. For years, it was considered the pinnacle of Olmec realism. The anatomy is near perfect. The sense of movement is palpable. It breaks from the stiff, blocky formality of the heads. It shows that Olmec art was capable of great range. They could do the monumental and the static, but they could also do the dynamic and the human. Though some controversy exists about its authenticity, most scholars accept it as a masterpiece of the culture. The legacy of the Olmecs is a testament to the power of the human spirit to organize, to create, and to endure. In the sweltering heat of the Gulf Coast, without the wheel, without metal, without beasts of burden, they built a world that set the stage for the rise of the greatest civilizations of the Americas. They are the root, and the Maya and Aztec are the branches. To know the Olmec is to know the origin of the Mesoamerican soul. To understand the true depth of the Olmec phenomenon, we must step away from the sun-drenched plazas of San Lorenzo and descend into the murky, anaerobic depths of the sacred bogs, where the most intimate secrets of this civilization were preserved not in stone, but in wood, rubber, and bone. While the colossal heads project an image of imperishable strength, it is in the waterlogged archaeological sites like El Manati that the humanity of the Olmecs is revealed with startling clarity. This site, located at the foot of the Cerro Manati Hill about 10 miles southeast of San Lorenzo, was not a city or a residence but a pure ritual space, a pilgrimage site used for over half a millennium. Here, the chemistry of the peat and the constant presence of fresh water created a time capsule that defied the tropical decay, preserving organic materials that have rotted away everywhere else in Mesoamerica. It is here that we find the Olmecs speaking to us not as titans, but as people terrified of the elements, desperate to appease the forces of nature through precise and often heartbreaking sacrifices. The transition from the monumental to the microscopic analysis of these offerings provides a completely different resolution to our picture of the mother culture. The excavations at El Manati, led by archaeologists Ponciano Ortiz and Carmen Rodriguez in the late 1980s and 1990s, uncovered a series of offerings that fundamentally changed our understanding of Olmec woodcarving and ritual. Buried in the thick, oxygen-free mud were dozens of wooden busts, carved from the wood of the ceiba and hog plum trees. Unlike the generalized features of the stone heads, these wooden busts appear intensely individualistic. They are preserved in such detail that one can see the grain of the wood and the distinct expressions on their faces. Some are male, some female, some appear young, others old. They were found wrapped in mats made of vegetable fibers, as if they were sacred bundles, or perhaps effigies of ancestors being put to rest. The faces are often downturned, with the characteristic baby face features, but they lack the heavy helmeting of the colossal heads. Instead, they show evidence of having once worn ear ornaments and perhaps perishable headdresses. The significance of these busts lies in their context. They were deposited during specific phases of ritual activity, often associated with the end of a cycle or a desperate plea for rain or fertility. The wood, usually the first thing to vanish in the jungle, here survives to tell us that the Olmecs were master carpenters and woodworkers, likely creating thousands of totems, pillars, and lintels that are lost to history. These busts suggest that the stone monuments we see today were merely the skeleton of a civilization that was fleshed out in wood, textile, and paint. Buried alongside these wooden ancestors were the earliest known rubber balls in the world, artifacts that rewrite the history of polymer science. For decades, it was assumed that the vulcanization of rubber, the process of treating natural latex to make it durable and bounceable, rather than sticky and brittle, was an invention of the 19th century, credited to Charles Goodyear. However, Chemical analysis of the balls found at El Manati proves that the Olmecs had mastered this chemistry 3,000 years earlier. The latex from the Castilla elastica tree, which is native to the region, is naturally sticky and degrades quickly. The Olmecs discovered that by mixing this latex with the juice of the moonflower or morning glory vine, Ipomaea alba, which contains sulfur compounds, they could chemically cross-link the polymer chains. This resulted in a material that was tough, distinctively bouncy, and resistant to decay. The proportions of the mix could be adjusted. A 50-50 mix produced a bouncy rubber for balls, while a pure latex mix might be used for adhesives or waterproofing. The balls found at El Manati vary in size, but some are roughly the size of a modern bowling ball or beach ball, yet solid and incredibly heavy. To hold one of these ancient spheres is to hold the tangible proof of the Olmecs' empirical scientific method. They were not just stumbling upon these mixtures. They were experimenting, refining, and standardizing the production of a material that would become central to the ritual life of all Mesoamerica. The ball game was not merely a sport, it was a ritual maintenance of the cosmos, where the movement of the rubber sphere mimicked the trajectory of the sun, and the court itself represented a cleft in the earth, an entrance to the underworld. The offerings at El Manati also take a darker turn, revealing the high stakes of Olmec religion. Interspersed with the wooden busts and rubber balls, archaeologists found the skeletal remains of infants. These were not proper burials in the sense of a cemetery. They were sacrifices. The bones, often belonging to newborns or even fetuses, show no signs of violence, suggesting the infants might have been suffocated or simply deposited alive into the bog to drown. The logic behind this horror is rooted in the Mesoamerican concept of reciprocity and sympathetic magic. The tears of children were often associated with rain. The more the children cried, the more the rain gods would be pleased. In a region where the agricultural cycle was everything, the life of a child was a payment made to the earth to ensure the survival of the community. The baby face motif seen in Olmec art takes on a chilling resonance in this context. The word jaguar babies, often depicted as limp or inert in the arms of rulers on the great altars and jade figurines, may be representations of these sacrificial victims. The ruler's power was demonstrated by his ability to offer the most precious thing imaginable, new life, to the gods. At El Manati, the bones are disarticulated, scattered among the wooden faces, binding the ancestors and the sacrificed innocents together in the eternal dark of the spring. This specific site was chosen because it was a natural spring at the foot of a hill. In the Olmec worldview, hills were the houses of the gods, and springs were the portals through which the supernatural entered the world. To place an offering here was to place it directly into the bloodstream of the earth. Moving from the organic to the mineral, the Olmec mastery of stone extended far beyond the colossal heads, into the realm of high-precision lapidary work. One of the most technically astonishing categories of artifacts is the concave mirrors made from iron ore minerals like hematite, ilmenite, and magnetite. These mirrors are not mere polished stones, they are ground to optical precision. Analysis of the curvature of mirrors found at La Venta and San Lorenzo shows that they were ground to a parabolic specification that implies a sophisticated understanding of geometry and focal points. When held to the sun, these mirrors can focus light into a beam intense enough to start a fire. The practical and ritual implications of this are immense. A priest or ruler possessing such a mirror could summon fire from the sun, a miracle that would have cemented his status as a conduit to the divine. Furthermore, these mirrors were likely used for divination. By gazing into the dark, reflective surface, a shaman might enter a trance state, the smoking mirror concept, that would later become central to the Aztec deity Tezcatlipoca. The craftsmanship required to produce these objects without metal tools is staggering. It would involve hundreds of hours of grinding with increasingly fine grades of abrasive sand, likely emery or crushed garnet, and polishing with leather and bamboo. The fact that the Olmecs sought out these specific magnetic minerals, often importing them from the Oaxaca highlands, indicates they understood the unique properties of the material. There is even speculation, backed by the discovery of a flattened, grooved magnetite bar at San Lorenzo, that the Olmecs may have understood the principles of magnetism and used these devices as geomantic compasses to orient their cities and ritual sites, predating the Chinese invention of the compass by a millennium. The color green was the obsession of the Olmec aesthetic, and this obsession drove a lithic supply chain that spanned half a continent. Jadate, the specific mineral valued by the Olmecs, is geologically rare. It is formed only under the immense pressure of subduction zones where tectonic plates collide. The Olmecs sourced their finest Olmec blue jadeite from the Motagua River Valley in what is now Guatemala, a distance of over 500 miles from the heartland of Veracruz. This trade was not a simple barter system. It was a state-sponsored enterprise. The jade was brought back to the workshops in the capitals, where it was worked with a technology that relied on string saws. A string saw is exactly what it sounds like. A cord, likely made of agave fiber or raw hide, charged with abrasive wet sand, pulled back and forth to cut through stone harder than steel. To drill holes in the jade beads and ear spools, they used bird bones or river reeds, again spun with abrasive sand. The friction and time required to perforate a single bead were immense. This labor theory of value meant that a jade necklace represented not just beauty, but thousands of hours of human life frozen in stone. The iconography carved into these jades is dense with meaning. A common motif is the cleft head, a V-shaped indentation at the top of the head. This mimics the fissure in the earth from which the maize plant sprouts. By carving a ruler or a deity with this cleft, the artist was identifying the figure with the maize god, the source of all sustenance. The jade itself, with its translucent green quality, was conceptually linked to water, young maize, and the breath of the soul. To bury a king with a jade mask was to wrap him in the permanent, imperishable essence of life, ensuring his regeneration in the underworld. Dietary reconstruction through isotopic analysis of human bone collagen found in Olmec burials allows us to bypass the artistic propaganda and look at what these people actually ate. The results paint a picture of a society in transition. While maize was present, it was not the exclusive staple it would become for the later Aztecs. The Olmecs were people of the estuary. A significant portion of their protein came from aquatic resources: freshwater clams, fish, turtles, and crocodiles. The dog, specifically the Canis lupus familiaris, was also a major food source. Piles of butchered dog bones found in domestic refuse middens at San Lorenzo confirm that dogs were raised for food, likely a feast food for special occasions. But the most significant chemical revolution was nixtamalization. This process, which involves boiling dried maize kernels in water mixed with wood ash or lime, calcium hydroxide, breaks down the hard outer hull of the kernel and releases the niacin, vitamin B3, and amino acids, making the corn digestible and nutritious. Without this chemical process, a diet reliant on maize leads to pellagra, a horrific disease of malnutrition. The archaeological evidence for nixtamalization appears in the form of increased calcium levels in the cooking pottery and the presence of specific grinding stones, mitates, designed for wet, processed dough, masa, rather than dry flour. This invention is arguably the most important technological breakthrough in the history of the Americas, as it allowed for the population densities required to build cities like San Lorenzo. The Olmecs, as the likely inventors or first major adopters of this technique, literally engineered the fuel for Mesoamerican civilization. The question of Olmec writing is one of the most contentious battlegrounds in modern archaeology. For decades, the prevailing view was that the Olmecs were a non-literate society, relying on complex iconography but lacking a true script. This view was challenged, perhaps shattered, by the discovery of the Cascajal block in the late 1990s. This serpentine slab, found by locals in a quarry near the site of Lomas de Tacamichapa, weighs about 12 kilograms and contains 62 distinct glyphs. The signs are unlike any other known Mesoamerican writing system. They include stylized representations of insects, maize, awls, and anthropomorphic figures. The arrangement of the glyphs, in horizontal rows rather than the vertical columns favored by the Maya, and the presence of repetitive sequences suggest a syntax, a language being recorded. If authentic, the Cascajal block represents the oldest writing in the Western Hemisphere, dating to the early formative period, circa 900 BCE. However, because it was not found in situ by archaeologists, it was removed from its context by the finders. Its dating relies on the ceramic sherds found in the spoil heap, which is indirect evidence. Skeptics argue it could be a hoax or a later artifact, but the weathering on the stone and the unique nature of the signs make a modern forgery unlikely. If it is genuine, it implies that the Olmecs had a literary tradition that has largely vanished. Why? Because they likely wrote on perishable materials. In the humid tropics, paper made from bark, a mate, or deerskin rots in weeks. The Cascajal block might be a rare exception, a blackboard, or a permanent record in a world of biodegradable books. The tragedy of Olmec history is that their thoughts, their poetry, and their chronicles may have decomposed into the soil, leaving us only the stone titles of their books, not the pages. The socio-political structure of the Olmecs was likely a complex web of what anthropologists call heterarchy and hierarchy. While the colossal heads prove the existence of supreme rulers, the spread of Olmec style suggests a mechanism more subtle than simple empire. The Olmecs probably operated as a collection of powerful, independent city-states, San Lorenzo, La Venta, Laguna de los Cerros, that shared a common culture and religion but competed for resources and prestige. This is similar to the classic Maya or the Greek city-states. The Olmec style was a prestige language. When a chieftain in the Valley of Mexico, hundreds of miles away, adopted Olmec pottery designs, he was not necessarily submitting to political domination. He was signaling his sophistication. He was buying into a brand. This style horizon is marked by specific motifs: the flame eyebrow, the U-shaped bracket, the crossed band symbol. These were not just decorations, they were ideograms. The crossed bands motif, for example, is thought to represent the entrance to the sky or the intersection of the Milky Way and the ecliptic. By wearing this symbol, a ruler claimed access to the celestial realm. The spread of these symbols suggests the Olmecs were the masters of an ideological network, exporting their religion and cosmology along with their jade and rubber. Let us examine the architecture of the Olmecs with a focus on their use of color and earth. We often imagine ancient ruins as gray stone, but the Olmec world was vividly, perhaps blindingly, colorful. At La Venta, the massive offerings involving serpentine blocks were covered in layers of colored clay, red, yellow, pink, and purple. The Great Pyramid itself was likely a vibrant earthen structure. possibly painted or covered in grass that changed color with the seasons. The floors of the ceremonial precincts were made of imported colored sands. The visual impact of walking into La Venta would have been overwhelming. The use of cinnabar, mercury sulfide, and hematite to create brilliant red powders was ubiquitous. Red was the color of blood and the rising sun. In tombs and caches, objects are often found dusted with this red powder, breathing life into them. The Olmecs were earth movers on a geological scale. The plateau of San Lorenzo is not natural. The top 7 meters of the ridge were modified by human labor. They moved tons of soil in baskets on their backs to level the ridge and create the terraces for their nobility. This terraforming required a degree of survey and engineering control that rivals the Romans. They understood soil mechanics well enough to build mounds that have survived 3,000 years of tropical rain without dissolving into mud. The pars pro toto principle is a key concept for decoding Olmec art. This Latin phrase, meaning a part for the whole, explains why Olmec art is often so abstract. The Olmecs would often depict a deity or a concept using only a specific characteristic element. A paw might represent the jaguar, a cleft might represent the maize god, a fin might represent the shark monster. This shorthand assumes a literate and culturally educated audience. When we see a jade spoon carved with a flame eyebrow, we are seeing a condensed theological treatise. One of the most complex deities in the Olmec pantheon is the Olmec dragon, also known as the earth monster. This creature is a composite hybrid, blending features of the caiman, the eagle, the jaguar, and the snake. It represents the earth itself, floating in the primordial sea, caiman, powerful jaguar, and connected to the sky, eagle. The open mouth of the Olmec dragon is the cave entrance. When Olmec rulers are depicted sitting in niches on altars, they are sitting in the mouth of this dragon. They are positioning themselves as the masters of the threshold, the only ones capable of keeping the jaws of the earth from snapping shut. Another fascinating specific is the evidence of cranial modification. The Olmecs, like the Maya after them, practiced the deliberate reshaping of the human skull. This was done to infants while the skull bones were still pliable, using boards and bindings to compress the head. In Olmec art, we often see figures with high pear-shaped heads. This was not just an artistic convention, it was a physical reality. The desired shape was likely intended to mimic the form of an ear of corn or the head of the jaguar. By reshaping the skull, the parents were physically inscribing the child into the social and cosmic order. It was a permanent mark of status and beauty. This practice shows the deep connection between the biological body and the cultural ideal. The body was a canvas to be sculpted, just like the basalt boulders. Alongside head shaping, there is evidence of dental mutilation, filing teeth into points or inlaying them with jade and pyrite. The pain would have been intense, serving as a rite of passage and a display of endurance. The Olmec relationship with the animal kingdom goes beyond the jaguar. Zooarchaeology reveals they had a profound interaction with the exuberant fauna of the Neotropics. The presence of toad remains, specifically the Bufo marinus, marine toad, in ritual contexts suggests the use of psychoactive substances. The glands of this toad secrete bufotenine, a powerful hallucinogen. It is highly probable that the Olmec shamanic trances were chemically assisted. The imagery of transformation, of the body twisting and the face contorting, matches the subjective experience of tryptamine-induced states. Furthermore, the harpy eagle, the shark, and the crocodile appear frequently in their iconography. These are the apex predators of the sky, the sea, and the river. By wearing the parts of these animals, shark teeth, eagle feathers, jaguar pelts, the shaman absorbed their predatory power. There is a specific motif known as the hand-paw wing, which combines human, feline, and avian anatomy, symbolizing the shaman's ability to traverse all three planes of existence. Let us drill down into the logistics of the ilmenite cubes. At the site of El Manati and others, archaeologists found carefully ground cubes of ilmenite, a titanium iron oxide. These were drilled to be worn as beads. The sheer difficulty of drilling titanium ore with stone tools cannot be overstated. It implies a specialized class of artisans who did nothing else but grind and drill. These workshops would have been loud, dusty, and busy places. The existence of such specialized labor proves that the agricultural surplus was sufficient to feed people who produced nothing edible, but only produced prestige. This is the definition of a complex civilization. The distribution of these specific beads helps map the trade routes. If we find San Lorenzo-style ilmenite beads in a burial in the valley of Oaxaca, we can trace the footsteps of the merchant who carried them. The end of the Olmec civilization is as complex as its beginning. It was likely not a single catastrophic event, but a, quote, systemic collapse. The reliance on a specific ecological niche, the river levees, made them vulnerable. A change in rainfall patterns, perhaps driven by El Niño cycles, could turn their breadbasket into a dust bowl or a permanent flood zone. There is also the volcanic winter theory. The Tuxtla volcanic field is active. A major eruption would have blanketed the agricultural lands in ash, choking the crops and clogging the rivers. The psychological impact of such an event would have been devastating. If the ruler's primary job is to ensure the favor of the nature gods, a volcanic eruption is a clear sign that the ruler has failed. This would lead to a loss of legitimacy, revolution, and the defacement of the monuments. The mutilated heads may be the result of this revocation of the mandate of heaven. The people did not just destroy the statues. They were ritualistically deactivating the failed machinery of the state. However, the Epi Olmec period, post-400 BCE, shows us the evolution of the culture. At Tres Zapotes, the use of the long count calendar begins. This system, which counts days from a mythological zero point, August 11th, 3114 BCE, allows for absolute chronological precision. The Olmecs, or their direct descendants, were obsessed with the deep past and the deep future. The Stela C from Tres Zapotes bears one of the earliest long count dates, corresponding to 32 BCE. This proves that the mathematical concept of zero and the positional numbering system were in use in the Olmec heartland before the classic Maya period. The invention of zero is a mathematical milestone that occurred independently in only two cultures in human history: ancient India and ancient Mesoamerica. The Olmecs were the pioneers of this intellectual leap. They needed zero not for commerce, but for astronomy, to calculate the vast cycles of time required to predict eclipses and planetary conjunctions. The Tuxtla statuette, a small greenstone figurine of a man wearing a duckbill mask, is a Rosetta Stone of sorts for this transition period. Covered in the Isthmian or Epi Olmec script, it links the iconography of the Olmecs to the writing of the Maya. The text on the statuette is complex, recording a date and a ritual action. The choice of a duck mask is significant. Waterfowl are creatures that can fly, walk, and dive, masters of the three realms. The figure represents a shaman in the guise of a wind god, later known as a Hekeral, or a water bringer. The intricate glyphs carved into the hard stone show a fully developed logosyllabic writing system, meaning it used a mix of logograms, signs representing whole words, and phonograms, signs representing sounds. This level of linguistic complexity takes centuries to evolve, further reinforcing the idea that the silent Olmecs were actually a highly verbal and literary culture whose library has simply been lost to the rot of the jungle. The acoustic archaeology of Olmec sites is a newly developing field. At the site of La Venta, the layout of the complex has been analyzed for its sound-reflecting properties. The basalt columns surrounding the sacred precinct creates a sound barrier, effectively soundproofing the inner sanctum from the outside plaza. Inside, the sound of a drum or a voice would be contained and amplified, creating a terrifyingly intimate acoustic environment for the rituals performed there. Conversely, the shape of the earthen pyramids might have been designed to project the voice of the speaker at the summit to the crowd below. The roar of the jaguar might have been mimicked using ceramic trumpets or friction drums, instruments where a stick is rubbed against a membrane to create a deep, growling sound. Being in the presence of the Olmec lords was an audiovisual experience designed to shock and awe. Finally, we must consider the Olmec diaspora. As the great centers collapsed, the elites didn't just die out, they moved. We see strong Olmec influences appearing in the Soconusco region of the Pacific coast, Izapa style, and in the Maya lowlands, Cebol and Tikal. At the Maya site of Cebol, specifically, recent excavations have found an E-group astronomical complex that dates to 950 BCE, contemporaneous with La Venta, and shows clear Olmec stylistic influence. This suggests that the relationship was interactive. The Maya were not just passive recipients. They were active participants in a pan-Mesoamerican culture that the Olmecs crystallized. The DNA of the Olmec civilization, the dedication to the green stone, the bloodletting rituals, the jaguar souls, the counting of days, became the substrate for the next 2,000 years of history in the Americas. The collapse was really a metamorphosis. The giant stone heads were left behind, sinking into the mud, but the ideas they represented walked out of the jungle and built the pyramids of Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza. The Olmecs achieved immortality not through their static monuments, but through the enduring power of their cultural software, which programmed the spiritual and political life of a continent. The story of the Olmecs is also a story of the resilience of nature. The jungle that swallowed their cities is the same jungle that provided them with everything they needed to build them. The rubber tree, the cacao pod, the jaguar, the limestone, the medicinal plants. The Olmecs were the first to catalog and utilize this immense biodiversity. Their civilization was a dialogue with the rainforest. When that dialogue broke down, when they overexploited the soil, or when the climate shifted, the jungle reclaimed its own. Today, as we uncover their secrets, we are learning to read that dialogue again. The Olmecs remind us that human civilization is fragile, dependent on the earth, and that even the greatest works of stone can be humbled by the slow, relentless growth of a tree root or the shifting of a riverbed. Yet in the carved jade and the vulcanized rubber, we see the triumph of the human mind, a light that shone briefly and brilliantly in the deep green dark of the ancient past. The study of the Olmecs is far from over. In fact, as new technologies like LiDAR strip away the forest canopy to reveal the true density of their settlements, we are realizing that the mother culture was grander, more populous, and more sophisticated than we ever dared to dream. The silence of the stoneheads is deceptive. They have quite a lot left to say.